bell tolled at the start of the 2006 ABSA Off-Road Championship season, it was to the roads and fields of Darling in the Western Cape that the country's best off-roaders set sail. In an 8-race-long season which would test man, machine and pit crew to the utmost, spanning some of the most inhospitable terrain on the southernmost tip of the continent. For the first time in the history of the sport in South Africa, the off-road circus pitched its tent at the spectacular Victoria and Alfred waterfront, Cape Town, for an expo. It set the scene for the Nissan Dealer 400 in Darling in the beautiful Western Cape. An air of expectation dominated, as there were the normal start of the season jitters, what with several new teams, new signings to the old teams and old and settled combinations getting ready to do battle over 400 Ks in and around the town that satirist Peter Kirk-Ace and his alter ego Evita Besaidnout made famous. After a demanding and rather tricky 40k prologue route had sorted out the starting order for the day's racing, it was a slugfest of sound, sights and speed as the teams got their new season underway. Gary Berthold and his nav Henry Kirstein held sway with Evan Hutchison and Akim Bergman, who clocked identical times. The Nissan Dealer 400 in Darling was underway. Hannes Fulda and Francois Jordan knows what it takes to win a national championship. The pair received a special award for finishing all their races the last season, not a thing that many teams could say in 05. They picked up right where they left off as they charged up from 4th on the start list. Krobler was putting in one of his trademark bull runs. Let's now go in car with a Ford Ranger team of Neil Woolridge and Kenny Schulthammer to see how hard they work. Impressive to say the least. They were well into the first of 3 laps over 125 Ks and it sorted out all their teething problems. Duncan Foss and Ralph Pitchford set a hard pace though. But the revelation of the race thus far had been motorite's Brandon Harkis. He'd had some much-needed sleep and his brand new car also had a facelift, with the appropriate motorite branding making it instantly recognizable. The man in the single-seater was on a mission. As for the M&M boys, Colin Matthews and John Moore in the Century Property Bat, after starting 7th, they'd steadily driven their way up, trying to clinch a top 5. The Class A chaps, Terence Marsh and Michael Whitehouse in the National Mobile Spec 1 Bat, were ultra steady like they'd been in 2005. It's a strategy that works for them. Archie Rutherford and Craig Doubtfire is another team that uses that same philosophy, and they were also progressing with surety on a tough but well-marked route, but one that claimed many punches. The dust was also a factor for teams further back. In the smaller Ford Ranger, Manfred Schroeder was, as always, Mr. Steady with a new co-driver Ward Huxtable next to him. They did, however, have a litany of problems, from a broken side shaft 60 Ks into the first lap to some serious flats, but they kept it going. Chris Visser and Jaapie Baardnorst in their Tyco Trucks Toyota were chasing hard, but they were caught in no man's land, clocking more than 3.5 hours for the first 2 laps, while the front teams were logging 3. Bees Besaidnout and Johan de Bruin had started off in the 14th place and had to contend with a fair amount of dust. The de Bruins were going well in the Toyota and scrubbing with the best of them. Ernest Corbett and Warwick Goosen in the Second Century Properties Bat were 21st after the prologue, but a super drive saw them climb steadily from that position. They were already into the top 15. Nell and Snolberger were firmly settled just outside the top 10, but couldn't break in. Arnold Duplessis and Johan Knox in their Nissan Hardbody were just not quick enough on the day due to overheating problems, and then to make matters worse, they would suffer 3 flats on the 3rd loop. Meanwhile, the Raysonic boys were firmly stuck. Johan and Etienne Besaidnout in their Edenko Bat were 20th, but only had an eye on a finish. Bevan Berthold and Robin Houghton were enjoying themselves in their first outing together. However, they lost some time in the dust, but as they said at the start, all they wanted was some points for a solid finish. Number A17 was James Kennelly, who was going at it full steam ahead after placing 29th in the prologue. Brothers Mark and Stuart Moffat in the Bosel Landy were leading in Class F, but their BMW-powered car was taking strain due to overheating. The dust was also taking its toll, and IBM Cement's Jaco Swanepoel and Graham Bishop, who was second in Class E, were back in 33rd place. Single-seater pilot David White in his Roacon Truggy was in 30th place, but he would also experience mechanical failure and was forced to call it a day. In Class S, Naheem Musaji and Nazim Moti had got themselves going again quite nicely, and their tyre rack racecode's four-wheel stayed on the ground, mostly. And just behind them, the Swaziland clubs John Thompson and Clinton McNamara and their Zarko Light Audi 2-litre were screaming along, but mechanical problems from the prologue continued to haunt them. At the head of affairs, the elder statesman Hannes Grobler, though, had taken control. With his normal mix of aggression and clever driving, he got himself to the front. And try as they might, his Nissan Navara teammates Foss and Pitchford just could not close the gap. And Schultheimer in their Ford Ranger 4-litre were quick too, but they also could not make an impression on Grobler, even though they were closing on Foss and Pitchford. SA champion Alfie Cox out of the event applied for the cheerleading job, and we figure the audition was so good he got the position. His teammate Brandon Harkis was flying. Matthews and Moore were trying to close the gap to the top 5, but every time it looked like they were doing it right, and then they would lose a little time again. Nashua Mobile Bat, ably piloted by Class A champion Terence Marsh and his co-driver Michael Whitehouse, doing a fine job, were in second in class and fourth overall, but they were losing out to Harkis, who was opening up the gap on them. The peace and quiet of the Darling countryside is probably still a little off-centre, because the Tyco Trucks Toyota of Chris Visser and Jabi Badenhorst still sounded like $1 million after a pounding in the loose sand and heat of the Western Cape. They were leading Class D. The Adenko space frame vehicle of Bez Besaidnout and Johan de Bruin also had a solid drive early on, and they were very consistent. But the old warhorse was at it again. Grobler on a mission to search and destroy. It was working. Harkis, son of the legendary Arthur, would have made Dad proud as he was setting the pace and making all the running in Darling. Woolridge and Schultheimer were hanging on for dear life after a good debut for the Ford Ranger in the SD class. They were third overall and second in class, while Whitehouse was doing Marsh the power of good with his controlled way of pointing the road out to his driver. As always, Foss and Pitchford let it all hang out, and they were chasing hard, but were just a tad off the pace. Almost in sight, there were still a few whoop-de-doos and yumps and bumps to negotiate, but a large percentage of vehicles did not get to the finish line, indicating the severity of the route and the terrain. The Leo Connex Connect Colloy Chev car with John Moore and Ashley Thorne aboard also put together a solid last loop of 125 k's to get up the order. But with all the dust and the occasional water splash out there, some cars went by in complete anonymity. Corbett and Goosen, combining many a year's worth of experiences, were flying along. Archie Rutherford and Craig Doubtfire in the second Dasher Mobile race car were doing their sponsor's product the world of good with a fine showing. Berthold and Houghton were showing remarkable restraint in the Castrol Toyota Hilux. It was their debut in the car, and they did well with it. The Tyco lads were well on their way to a 5th place, almost 25 minutes back of the leaders and leading in Class D. Martin and Oki Fourie and another Castrol Toyota were also creeping up the order and upset a few of the works team's plans. Now what's the bet that that fellow is a Ford driver? He was pointing Manfred Schroeder and Ward Huxtable on their way to an 18th place overall and second in Class E. With a 2.5-litre Ranger, this was a great showing. In the 19th position and second in Class D, it was Gutsiela Beskachny and Johan Gerber who took their Nissan hardbody to hell and back because a loose pipe on the gearbox cost them at least 40 minutes. At the finish line, the Nissan faithful lifted their red caps to a stellar performance from Hannes Grobler and Francois Jordan, who brought it home in 5 hours and 29 minutes to start the Nissan squad off on their march to a 6th consecutive title, and that's despite a couple of flats too. Home with a drive of his life and surprisingly just more than a minute behind the Navara, it was Brandon Harkis who stunned friend and foe with his phenomenal drive. The Motorlight team were ecstatic with a great showing from the new man in the team, and it was made even sweeter in view of the fact that he was in a single-seater.